So, so I guess one of the things hopefully that came out of the talk was the point that Parkinson's disease is really very variable, and it can affect pretty much anyone, any age, any sex, any ethnicity. And so what we wanted to talk about in this session was whether research is really sort of targeting everybody with Parkinson's and targeting the whole variety of Parkinson's disease, or whether we are being too biased in terms of who we're including and why that might matter. So, first question, I think probably to Julia, if that's all right.
Sure.
Actually, no, before we do questions, let's introduce ourselves. So you're about to introduce myself already. Julia, do you want to just explain who you are?
Hi, everyone. I'm Julia Greenland. I'm a neurologist working in Cambridge, and I worked with Caroline to run the AZA-PD clinical trial.
Hi, I'm Richelle Flanagan. I'm from Dublin, Ireland. I'm coming up to 10 years now living with young onset Parkinson's, and I set up a company called My Moves Matter, originally focusing on the impact of hormones on Parkinson's and trying to look at the sex-gender differences. So today has been really fantastic to see what's coming out. So it's me.
Hi, I'm Jagdeep, diagnosed with Parkinson's in June 2021. So I advocate for exercise and diversity into research, plus plenty of other stuff as well.
Thank you. Okay, so first question is, I guess a bit about sort of definitions. So what do we mean by bias? This is perhaps a question to Julia to start with. What's bias in clinical trials? And can you tell us a bit about that?
I suppose just taking a step back and thinking really broadly, when we're doing research or a trial, we're asking a question and trying to find knowledge about Parkinson's as a whole. And, ideally what we want to know is, in everyone in Parkinson's, what's the truth? What happens? But we can't do that. So we have to look in just a group of people who have the condition. And the question might be about symptoms of the disease. It might be about why people have the disease, or it might be whether a treatment is going to be helpful or not. And in order to extrapolate our findings, to take our findings from our research study, we want to make sure that group of people who've taken part in the research can represent people with Parkinson's as a whole. And that's what we're thinking about, whether when we ask the question, are we being representative? Is our study representative of Parkinson's? And so bias comes along where actually our study isn't representative. And that might be because we as researchers haven't thought about our recruitment or reaching out to people to represent the condition as a whole. Or it might be because certain people are more likely to put their hands up and sign up for research. But it's really our job to start to unpick that and think about that when designing our studies going forward.
Thank you. Richelle, do you have anything to add about bias in trials?
Do I what? I experienced bias when I was, diagnosed. So I am a dietitian 21 years now, and I basically picked up my symptoms when I was 3 months pregnant with my daughter. And I noticed that my handwriting was a lot smaller when I wrote on a client's record card from 5 years, to 5 years prior. Looked up micrographia and then anyway got diagnosed. But when I was, seen by the neurologist, he said, "Well, you're very young, you're pregnant, you're a woman. It's probably unlikely to be young onset Parkinson's." And when I was diagnosed, I kind of thought, well, every image I see is like of an older white male with a stoop and a tremor, and I had no tremor, and I didn't have the symptoms, the stoop or whatever, so I just, there was a lot of bias in terms of, I also couldn't get a DAT scan until my daughter was born and breastfed, because I couldn't, so I basically had to carry that potential diagnosis until she was finished breastfeeding. So there's bias in all of that. And then in terms of, the image, I think, every presentation I've seen is that picture of a stooped man I think it's done huge injustice to research in terms of that image has biased all of the trials towards that image when we know. So when I went to the World Parkinson's Congress, I went to look for other women, and there were lots of other young onset women. And then when I researched it more, 40% of people with Parkinson's are women. And actually in some countries, it's higher. So some Asian countries, in Poland, it's higher in women than it is men. So why is that? And why aren't we looking at it? And so the other thing was, when I met some women with young onset in the World Parkinson's Congress, we kept in contact during COVID, etc. And we noticed that our symptoms got worse around our menstrual cycle. So the week before our menses, basically our symptoms got worse, and for some women during their menstrual bleed. And we did a survey through a group called the PD Avengers, and also myself and my two friends set up the Women's Parkinson's Project to try and raise the voices of women with Parkinson's in terms of better care and access to research. And in that survey of 240 women worldwide, 84% of women reported the same problem, with their symptoms getting worse the week before their menstrual cycle, and 49% during their menstrual cycle or the menstrual bleed. And we've had the Michael J. Fox has actually, repeated that data. Val Hebron has repeated that data. And also in the survey we did showed that 40% of women reported worsening of their symptoms going from the premenopause to postmenopause. And again, Michael J. Fox has shown that. Survey has shown that as well through their Insight platform. And, it's without a shadow of doubt, it's shown that something is going on with regard to the hormones alongside the menstrual fluctuations, and also in terms of going through the perimenopause into postmenopause. So there's so much, that has been left out of the picture. So lots of bias.
Yeah.
But I think this has really started to show that the tide, I think, is going to turn. And I think the important thing is it's going to actually have huge benefit, not just for women, but for men as well. But I think there's so much that, can be benefit from rectifying.
So bias in terms of not just research, but also in terms of sort of clinical aspects of diagnosis and treatment.
Yeah.
Important.
And obviously within that,
yes, I mean,
Jagdeep will.
Yeah, so I think I'll just focus on the research side of bias. I don't think our communities, ethnic minorities, are getting approached the correct way. Just to inform them that this research is available. Most of the research I've defined, I'm second generation here, so for me to find it is fine. But for the people before me, they won't know that you have to look at Cure Parkinson's or Parkinson's UK to try to find the research. So just reaching out to the communities, trying to get the research into the communities, then the communities will come to the research.
Yeah. Okay. So so bias is, I guess, important not only in terms of sex and gender, but also in terms of ethnicity, as you've alluded to. We'll come back to those things in a minute. Just thinking a bit more about this idea of sort of gender and sex and bias around that. I mean, the AZA-PD trial, as we've just sort of talked about, showed this stronger response in women. Julia, I don't know if you know whether in other clinical trials, is this something that's been looked at?
So historically, not across the board. I think in your talk, you alluded to the fact that it has to be pre-specified. It has to be decided beforehand. Actually, this is something we're going to look at to be able to report it from a scientific point of view, which isn't always thought about in advance. And as I said, historically, broadly, it hasn't been. Having a quick look through recent trial publications, however, there is a move towards this being thought about. So, for example, the recent phase 3 examatide trial did pre-specify this and did look at sex subgroups. So it is becoming actually more acknowledged, which is a really positive thing going forward.
And do you have any thoughts on, I know you're trying to get to the bottom of why we might have seen this difference, but have you got any thoughts that you can share about, what you think might be going on?
Specifically in the AZA?
In terms of the AZA trial, yeah.
Well, there's a lot of, it's very well known that the immune system is different in men and women. And we all see this really broadly. Women have a more powerful immune system, and we're better at fighting infections, but we're more predisposed to actually the immune system being too active and causing autoimmune disease or diseases where the immune system attacks their own body. And there's many ways where this is thought to be caused by, but broadly hormones, similar to what Richelle's talking about. Actually, it's a huge influence and directly on immune cells, but also genetics, because women have a different genetic makeup with different genes on X chromosomes. So those are just some examples of how this could be having an effect. Honestly, we don't understand that yet. But we really need to, because this is a really important finding that can inform future trials for future treatments. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And Richelle, you've already told us a bit about sort of some of the differences in Parkinson's in women versus men. And I mean, do you think the differences are essentially all biological? So is it all to do with genes and hormones and things, or is it more to do with sort of women's experiences and the way they perceive things? And do you think that's anything to do with some?
I think there's a mixture. I think it's that, the two go hand in hand.
Yeah.
I think even within different ethnic communities, I know with Shafak Ali, who's a wonderful advocate as well, a dentist, and we've done a lot of work around women with Parkinson's, and within different ethnic groups, that whole cultural, in terms of perhaps wouldn't talk about women's issues as much as white communities might, and that's going to have an impact. And also potentially in terms of Black women tend to have earlier menopause and a more aggressive menopause, worse symptoms. So what that has in terms of an impact, I don't know. And different cultures approach probably taking part in research differently. Although there was kind of an interesting couple of studies I read there in advance of this, saying that actually people of different ethnic minorities are just as willing as white, to take part in trials. That actually part of the problem is really, meeting them where they are. And I suppose we did a study with University College Cork on using an app we developed to track, Parkinson's symptoms across hormonal sort of stage of life. And we had 500 women take part, in that. And I think part of that was because it was a woman involved in the research and really, and I think, it has to be, I think people with Parkinson's being really put center of the research to actually bring more people in, so they recognize themselves in that research and they want to support it. I think that's really important part of the gender as well as the sex aspect.
Absolutely. Jag, have you got any thoughts about sort of gender and sex and how that impact?
Generally, it's important because, like yourself and previous researchers showed that there's women get affected differently from drugs, and people from different communities will be the same. There won't be one drug fits all. So it's going to have to be useful for people to come in from these minorities so we can see if that drug works the same. And because it's not going to be one fits all, because we know this with Parkinson's. But getting out there's a recent study where Africans were less likely to be offered deep brain stimulation. Why? Why is that? Why aren't they offered the same as everyone else?
And it's the same with women. So we know that women don't get offered, they're not referred by neurologists as often for DBS. And even though sometimes they do better than men with DBS. And also when women do get offered, they don't tend to take it up as much. And I think we kind of possibly know why that is. I was interested in the lumbar, puncture. I think women tend to turn that down more than men do. So more invasive, procedures. And also in terms of, other device-aided therapy, like pumps. Women, the research shows that women don't get offered that as much, or they're not represented as much in the trials. So, so in order, like I'm 10 years in and, I'm on levodopa 5 times, I'm fluctuating, I'm thinking, okay, what's my next protocol? And it's DBS or it's, maybe progeodopa. But, I don't have the answers for me as a woman to know what is the outcome for me in terms of going DBS or progeodopa. Back to the lady's point, it's all male.
Yeah, the evidence isn't good enough for you to be able to evaluate that. Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay. Just going back to what you were saying before, Jack, about sort of ethnicity and the problems around, people of different ethnicities perhaps not being well enough represented. I mean, can you tell us a bit more about that, and what sort of things ought we to be doing to try and improve?
Well, there's, like I said, the first generation people that are in their 75 and 70 years old, they simply ain't aware of from the research that's going on. So my group, my exercise group I do, after the exercise, I tell them about research that's going on that they can get into. So, but it shouldn't really, it should be me, but it should be a combined effort, both from people like Cure Parkinson's and Parkinson's UK. But I know they've come on leaps and bounds, right, in trying to get people from diverse communities involved. But to me, that's still the tip of the iceberg, because I ain't saying it. Every week I look at papers, research papers. Nowhere do they say that this community was involved. They just give you a figure, 210 or 200, but not people from Africans or Caribbeans or Chinese or anything that are being involved. But I think we have to reach out to them, the communities, like I do. I go to local events, speak about Parkinson's, tell them the importance of trying to get involved in research, because I said, if you can't find a cure for this generation, maybe for your kids or grandchildren, we can.
Yes, yeah. And I mean, Julia, is that something that sort of you find in the research literature? Is that very apparent that, most cohorts are dominated by by white populations rather than ethnic minorities?
Yes, I think absolutely. And as Jack was saying, it's either not really mentioned, or it's glossed over, or it's I think you're absolutely right.
I mean, I think it's been a particular problem in terms of sort of genetic studies, hasn't it? So a lot of the sort of work that's come out of genetic studies is really based on Caucasian populations. So much more needs to be done to better understand the genetic background of Parkinson's, I think, in different ethnic groups. Have you got any thoughts, Richelle, on this, and what we ought to be doing better in terms of, getting more people of different ethnicities involved in research?
Yeah, well, again, the research shows that from a female point of view, that women are more likely to take part in research studies that are run by women.
Yes.
So I think, in terms of, it's probably the same in terms of, different ethnic communities, that again, if they're run by or have people, of Asian background or whatever background, part of that, research team, I think that is something that's going to make a difference.
Yeah.
And there's research, I know it's kind of slightly off piece, but showing that women who have surgery under men do less well than women who have surgery under women. So, there's probably because, they're interested in their own, species or whatever, So I think there is something within that we probably need to allow people to see themselves in the research team.
Yeah. Okay. What about age and bias? So in many clinical trials, there is we focus on a particular age group. I mean, Julia, I might come to you to talk about this a bit more. I mean, for AZA-PD, for example, we
did
a restricted age range. Do you want to comment?
I don't know, it's a really challenging issue, because on one hand, like I was saying at the beginning, in an ideal world, we would like to have a fully representative group of people who capture what you'd expect from the spectrum of Parkinson's disease, from young onset to to really late in life. But there are other considerations we have to take into account when designing and running clinical trials. One of them is, we heard from, I suppose, Simon's talk at the beginning, highlighted the many factors which are known, or the biological things that can contribute to Parkinson's disease. And in a young group, that is actually, there's a higher a high proportion of people have a genetic cause. And so when we include that group into a clinical trial, we are having a broader amount of a contribution of a genetic cause, which may have a different underlying mechanism. And so potentially our whatever drug we're testing may work in that group and may not work in an older population or vice versa. And therefore we're less able to interpret, or we're watering down the potential effect. Another challenge is the older age group. And thinking about our AZA-PD specific example, we didn't include over 80s. Actually, mostly for safety reasons, because we know that people will be hit harder by infections and complications. And, of course, we have a responsibility of keeping our trial participants safe. And also, as you get older, you're more likely to have other diseases which might impact on the scores we test. And so, again, we're introducing things which may alter our outcomes that we're looking at and make it harder to be able to interpret the results. So it essentially muddies the water and makes it more challenging, which is why historically we have included a narrower band of ages in our trials. Commenting on whether that's the right thing is difficult, but those are the reasons for us doing it. And I think going forwards, initiatives like the EGS AZA-PD are, now we're looking at being able to broaden that, and in having a really large population of patients, being able to then have that ability to separate and look at age groups separately, for example.
So I guess that's one of the key things, isn't it? Having a trial population that's big enough that you can then look at particular subgroups. Yeah. And Richelle, I mean, you mentioned you were diagnosed with Parkinson's quite early, and I mean, did you feel that being diagnosed at a young age was sort of causing a barrier for you being involved in research?
Yeah, I think I don't see that many trials that include young onset people in it, and it's quite interesting when you look at the prevalence of Parkinson's. It's actually closer to 1-to-1 in the young onset group under the age of 40. So I kind of think that's quite interesting, that perhaps that's saying that at that stage the hormones aren't having as much of an impact. Maybe that's, I don't know, but it's a very interesting set to actually investigate, I think, in terms of. And I think the genetic has probably been overplayed in that. It's still only 15 to 20%. So what about the rest of us who are? Well, I have lots of young onset women. It's interesting. Their parents, some of them have been diagnosed, but they have been tested genetically and they haven't got a gene. But I don't know if that's over time the gene will express. I don't know. But I think you've mentioned that, Jagdeep. So I kind of wonder, in terms of your trials you were talking about today, the MAMS or whatever, could you have a similar trial that basically has stratified by age and by, so that, as the lady mentioned, why should we be penalized? Why? I mean, if that was, shown in terms of for men, that as the therapy worked, I don't think there would have been a question of you continuing on that trial. Why are we not jumping on the bandwagon and saying, right, we need to do a decent bloody big trial on this in women and see, does it, help? I mean, and also in terms of that drug, we know that people with ulcerative colitis or Crohn's, inflammatory bowel disease, have a higher risk of Parkinson's, which disappears when they're put on these anti-inflammatories. So why aren't we drilling into that? And women tend to have more of the one, I think if it's ulcerative colitis or Crohn's, one of them is higher in men to women, and there's so many answers and in terms of immune conditions, they're much higher in women than men, particularly postmenopausal. Women have much higher levels of autoimmune conditions than men do. So there's so many things that we have yet to unearth.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jack, have you got any thoughts about sort of age and bias in how people are treated or how they're?
I think, I think we're in a great position now, in the sense of over the last 3 or 4 years, I've seen both Cure Parkinson's UK collaborating with the other charities around the world. like Parkinson's Foundation, Michael J. Fox, there wasn't so much of that going ahead before. But Parkinson's France, Canada, everybody, they're all getting their heads together now and trying to find that end goal. So whether that means like getting more trials, but specifically YOPD or early onset, or giving trials for people 75 and above, because we know generally it affects more people at that age and they're sort of just left to deal with it themselves. And they just look at trials, but they say, we can't do that trial because of the age. We can't do that because of this. So we're sort of like alienating this sort of like cohort of people that have got Parkinson's and they've got no way to turn. So yeah, just trying to get more specific, but work as a combined like research teams as opposed to just by doing it bespoke by yourself sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess that brings us on to the idea of sort of stratification and subgrouping and, how should we be moving forward? So if we start with Julia, I guess with this, do you think the way forward is for us to be doing just much bigger trials, but stratifying and splitting people into different groups to look at effects? Or should we be doing targeted studies in particular subgroups? So, for example, trials just in women, trials just in young onset PD.
I suppose, my feeling is it depends on the research question you're asking.
Yeah.
And if there is a strong rationale for saying, actually, we've got some early evidence and a scientific basis to think that this medication may just work in women or just work in someone with a GBA mutation, and there's a clear biological reason why we are testing this group of people, then I think that's a good thing to do, because this is coming to precision medicine. We know that, like you were saying earlier, Caroline, everyone with Parkinson's looks a bit different. It's a really variable disease, and lumping everyone together in some circumstances may mean that we're watering out and not showing something that actually may be helpful for that small group of people. So I think we've got a strong biological rationale for doing a small targeted trial. I think that is a very good way forward. But equally, at the same time, there are lots of common mechanisms and common problems across the board, in which case we should also be doing these trials like the AZA-PD, where we're being as inclusive and broad as possible. And in those, we should be making sure we're reaching to, as many people and including as many people as possible across the board for Parkinson's. That's my feeling.
Yeah. Richelle, can I ask you a similar question? What do you think is the best way forward? Do you think we ought to be, as you were mentioning, doing really targeted studies where we just include women, just include people of a certain age? Or do we just include absolutely everybody that we can and then sort of try and separate the data afterwards?
I think we have to do both. I think we need to probably, like say in terms of your research, it's pretty obvious there, to my mind, that one has to be done in women to really see what's going on and answer those questions. But then in terms of, in other cases, you probably have to do, wider, like, to be honest, it comes down to funding as well as cost, I think, in terms of, like, we're doing a different thing. We're doing a pilot with Queen's University Belfast on an online nutrition program around Mediterranean diet, and we're looking at the difference between the Mediterranean score over the time of following this diet. And we were looking at the UPDRS and the kind of secondary measures. Well, we couldn't statistically actually do that because it's going to cost too much to actually run the trial for more people to be able to answer those. So it really gave me an insight to, like, money is a big part of answering these questions.
Absolutely.
If you're going to have a bigger, pot of people, you need more money to analyse it and to answer all the different questions. Yeah. So there's kind of a money question in that as well. I think that probably answer helps to decide.
It's a real challenge because if you want to get enough women and enough men, for example, in a trial to see a statistically significant effect in both groups, you've got to basically double your sample size, which is really...
That has a huge, I've learned from other researchers, has a huge cost.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Jack, what are your thoughts?
I'm just pretty much on Richelle's zone there. Stratification is great. I think precision medication for different diverse groups is great, but whether it's financially possible or whatever, but yeah.
I think also, what needs to happen more is kind of decentralized, trials in terms of, helping people to take part, make it easier. I mean, people with Parkinson's, have trouble, walking.
Yeah.
They're told to go off all their medications for a trial. And like, that's, I think that's really terrifying.
Yeah.
The offer that, and so like bringing things into people's homes that they can do that at home and not, be in fear of being off for several hours, or, in terms of women, childcare, to help them, the cost of, so there are a number of things that could help people take part in the trials as well. But I mean, ultimately we have responsibility as people with Parkinson's to take part, put ourselves forward as well.
Yes.
But
but as you say, there are obviously lots of barriers potentially for people taking part in research. I mean, I guess there's a sort of final question. What sort of are the best measures that you think we can put in place to bring down those barriers? Maybe I'll start the other end, Jag. But
like I said, reach out to the communities, use the people like myself, Shafak, other people that have got Parkinson's, that are sort of championing that sort of co-approach to trying to get people out and because research isn't all clinical. You can do PPMI or whatever. You can do loads of other stuff as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I think as well, in terms of like the study we did at UCC, like from the survey, we've got some really good data from that. And I think as well, people just realize it doesn't have to be the invasive trials, but survey data, taking part in that can really answer a lot, in terms of for you with your research teams, to give us more ammunition to work with. But I think I was on a podcast once and with different people from different conditions, and one woman suggested having a chief, patient officer as part of a research team. And I think that's actually a really good idea that really, helps to speak the language of the people living with the condition.
Fantastic.